What else would I be doing but coming with you guys to bake some Christmas cookies? So these are a peppernut. Some people may know them as Peppernuts. They are delicious. I hate to say but they are anise flavored cookies. And my grandma made gallons of these every year and gave them out. She was known for her peppernuts, and they're just delicious. They're a German tradition, and I think other cultures have them too, and they're often called different things, and each one has slightly different ingredients. My family's comes from a German tradition, and they have anise oil in them. And honestly, I don't usually love black licorice, but in these cookies, whether it's the nostalgia or just having the memory and the instant I smell them and taste them, I'm walking into my grandma's house and just having these cookies and smelling them, her making them. She would usually start in October because she made so many of them. We are gonna make them together and start our own tradition. So for these, it's pretty simple. But before we get started, I am gonna make some sour milk. A lot of old recipes, especially old Midwestern recipes, have a little bit of sour milk, which is just some milk with a little bit of vinegar, and it just kind of acidulates it, gets it worked in a little bit. And I think that's honestly because one, some recipes are written actually for sour milk if you happen to have some on hand. And then this was a way to have that milk in a quicker way, and especially as it was easier to keep milk as time went on in a fridge or something, you maybe didn't have as much sour milk, so you can make your own. So we're gonna let that sit. In our bowl here, we're going to add molasses. I use so much of this at Christmas. And honestly, for me, I use either a molasses or a sorghum, which is very similar. You can usually interchange them. I do not like to use a blackstrap. I use a regular or a mild. Blackstrap can just make these cookies plenty dark and be a little bit overpowering flavor-wise. I did spray this with some nonstick baking spray because it does come out a little bit easier. It's still kind of messy, but it helps a little bit. So the molasses is right in there. To me, that is just instant, kind of a Christmassy smell, and I love that. So with that, we're gonna put in some lard. I know, lard sounds scary. It's a fat, just like butter. Fat is fat is fat. Lard comes from rendered pork, as you know, and I sometimes, to make it easier to scoop out, this is a 1/4 cup ice cream scoop, and so I know exactly how much I'm scooping out if I use that. So I'm gonna put in my lard, and you know, you're gonna say, well, can I use shortening? Sure, you can. It does affect the flavor. A lard, which you can buy lard, if you're going to, I would go to a good butcher and make sure you have a good rendered lard, because bad quality lard just smells really, really porky and could have sediment in it. Don't want that. You want good lard. So we're gonna put this on, and we're gonna add some sugar. These are a very small cookie when we're done, which you'll see, and I mix them up at least a day ahead because it's best to let them really chill, and I like to do that even in the freezer, which you'll see once we roll them out, because then they're much easier to cut. I know, if you haven't heard of these, you're confused, but let me tell you, with some coffee, nothing better. So we have the sugar in there. We're gonna mix them up just to combine all that. I would not say like a regular cookie, this gets light and fluffy, but you just combine it. So you can see it comes together, it gets a little bit lighter colored. I will scrape down the bowl just to make sure it is all incorporating evenly. Sometimes in an electric mixer, that bottom divot can kind of fill in and it doesn't always get mixed. And so you just kind of want to scrape it down and just make sure, because you don't want any pockets of anything when you're making these. So to that, I'm gonna add an egg, just one. One batch can make a decent amount. It roughly makes, once we're done, we roll these out in logs and then cut little cookies. So of the finished product, it makes like a kind of a scant gallon worth of cookies. Sounds like a lot, it really isn't. So along with that, the star ingredient, which literally comes from an anise star. Anyway, anise oil. So anise oil, you wanna just make sure you get real, quality, food grade oil. It's not something you're gonna use a lot. And yeah, it's gonna last you a long time. But if you're like me and this becomes a tradition, I would always get grandma's for her, because she used to actually go to a pharmacy to get it. Because at one time, pharmacies stocked pure oils. And then when they stopped doing that, I would have to go find it for her. And I finally found the one she liked. And I just love doing things like that. It made her so happy. So we're gonna mix that up. Instantly, you get the anise. And it's just like, there. I just instantly get that. Grandma would measure it out drop by drop, and every so often say, this year is 26 drops of anise oil, or 24. She was so precise. I just measure out the same amount every year just to make it easier. I'm gonna put in my sour milk. Sounds gross. I feel like this is really just pulling on my Midwestern roots. I'm pulling out all the things that are kind of odd in today's like baking world. But you know what, if it works and it's delicious, which this does and it is, it's worth doing. Why change something that's good? It's not broke. We're gonna mix that in. So I have the milk mixed in. It could look a little broken at first because that's a sour milk. And so it will kind of maybe break the mixture or actually kind of break the milk itself, which sounds gross, but it really isn't. So I'm just mixing and making sure all of it's kind of worked up from the bottom. Now we just add our dry ingredients. So flour, and it's a lot of flour, you guys. So we're gonna put this in and it's gonna completely, obviously, change the dough. Last cup of flour, I told you it is a lot of flour. And then we're gonna add some baking soda. Pretty much any time almost a recipe uses molasses, sorghum, or any of the like, it's gonna have baking soda in it. There's a reaction between the two. So we're gonna start this really low. Every so often, if your mixer's over full, just turn it off. Settle the flour. We're gonna keep it slow until it starts mixing together. So if you look in, this is the dough. It is nothing special. It is what it is. You should never taste anything that has raw egg in it. I taste it for some reason only just to make sure it tastes like it should always taste. And it does. So I'm gonna clean all this up, then we're gonna roll them out. You'll see it's a pretty quick process and let them rest overnight. Pretty simple. I have my dough or batter off the mixer. I'm just giving it a final mix here by hand just to make sure it's all mixed in. You don't want any streaks of like molasses or dry ingredients, and it's actually looking pretty good. So this is kind of a rough, shaggy dough. If you need to and it seems extra sticky, you can put a very just light amount of flour down. You don't really want too much. You don't really want to add in too much flour. What we're doing, this is going to be the part that just seems a little odd if you haven't had these. We're taking a little amount of dough, nothing special. I just shortened it for you. And we're gonna sit here and we're just gonna go back and forth a little bit. And we're making a log. So what we do with this log is once it is chilled fully, and this is why if we cut it right now, you would just smash this log up and it really wouldn't have any, any validity to it. It would just have no structure. It would just completely, and it looks imperfect now, but once it chills, we're just gonna be able to go through and make easy cuts on it because it will be solidified. And then each little cut will be an individual little cookie. So it's kind of like an icebox cookie if you've ever made those, except a little bit different and a little bit more work. These are a labor of love. So I'm gonna put them all onto lined baking sheets. I'm gonna roll out a few, get them on there for you, and I'll show it to you when they're done, and then we'll throw them into the freezer. I'm rolling out one of the last ones for this pan, and what you can see I'm doing is I kind of cut it off and make it fit whatever pan I'm putting it on. So this is a rimmed baking sheet. I have parchment on the bottom, and then I just want them to fit crossways. You don't have to do it that way. I just think, you can curve them up a little bit. So you're probably thinking on some of them they look a little uneven, but really once they chill and we start cutting them, that kind of comes out in a wash and you don't notice it. The imperfections kind of go away. So I'm gonna fill this pan with one more. I'm gonna cover it in plastic wrap. Then I'm actually gonna throw them into the freezer overnight. I find they cut a lot easier if they're frozen. I just think it works better. And then tomorrow, we are gonna make this house smell like, for me, Christmas or my grandma's house, or for you, hopefully, an amazing new smell that you haven't smelled yet. So chilling them, and then tomorrow we are gonna make some peppernuts. Welcome back. It has been overnight and it is the next day. Of course, Mom is here.
Hi.
So when I talk about the grandma that made peppernuts all the time, that was Mom's mom. Grandma is not here any longer, my mom's mom. My dad's grandparents are still here, but that grandma's the one that made these all the time. And so she often always just did it by herself completely, right?
Yes, she did.
And she would do,
hours of labor.
Oh my goodness. She would start in October sometimes, because it was her mission to make everyone in her life that she loved some. So it always started with all her kids. There were 4 kids, and she would give them each. It started with 1 gallon. And then at some point that seemed to climb to 2 gallons.
2 gallons.
Because everyone in our family, we just all really like them. And I think it's probably the strongest food memory we have. Well, there's other ones on that side of the family too. Coffee, ice cream. Lasagna, always, things like that. But peppernuts were like grandma's thing. And so she would just do them by herself. She was always good at like tasks. Like if there was one big task, she would just sit and do that task and was so good at it. But anyway, she was such a strong worker anyway, she loved these. These were her thing. Her mom made them. Some of her sisters even made them. But Mom and I like making them together because these are time consuming.
Very time consuming. But
they're real. It's an easy.
They wouldn't be so time consuming if you'd learned to not roll them quite so little. But I know they're supposed to be.
These look just like grandma's when they're done. When they are baked, they look like grandma's. They do. So traditionally, I think traditionally peppernuts are supposed to be like the size of a pencil, aren't they?
No, they're supposed to be like the size of a nut. So you're doing it correct. It's just
You can make them any size you want. Really, what this is, it's a fridge cookie. It's a freezer cookie. I mean, it's one that you make a dough, you roll it into a log, and then you cut it and bake it. So I like to freeze them though, because these little logs tend to get pretty soft. And if you do one that's just chilled, as you're cutting them, which somehow grandma always just chilled hers, but as you're cutting them, they kind of can lose shape. So I like to have them frozen, so as I cut them, they don't lose their shape.
Right.
And if the little circles, like if you come over here and look, some of these are a little bit wonky, or they bake up and look round when they're done. It's really not a huge deal. It's a pretty simple cookie, kind of simple ingredients. We don't mess with the recipe. Grandma was exact enough that, I said she used a dropper.
She used a dropper to get the exact amount of drops.
I know, I have that dropper, but I now just measure it just to make sure. So we are going to fill this. They don't spread too much. So you don't want to grease it or oil it. You just use a nice thin cookie sheet, and then you throw them. Now, if you are worried about sticking or if you have different cookie sheets, a parchment on the bottom is not a bad idea. That's gonna ensure that they do not stick. So if you haven't ever made them and aren't sure how your oven or your baking sheet are gonna go, use parchment. There's just no reason not to. So we're gonna keep cutting, put them on, we're gonna throw them in the oven, not throw them because then they would fall off and that would just be depressing. And we're just gonna keep making them because that's kind of the fun of it. This is our second batch this year.
And then you get to have coffee at the end.
We only eat these with coffee. To us, that's the only way you eat them. I have to dip them slightly. That's just what I do. But we always have them with coffee. So we're gonna keep making them. We're gonna bake them. It's gonna smell delicious. Can't wait. So we're baking, cooling, putting them off. So I will say, if you're not used to making them, it's probably easier to do on parchment. What I do, parchment, you can see literally how easy this is. I'm gonna pull that parchment off, and then we can just pull them off the parchment. It's pretty simple. What I do, this is what grandma did, so this is why I do it, but it's probably complicated, is I take the pan when they come out, hold it, and scrape them off.
Right, yeah.
But if you're not used to that.
They didn't have parchment when grandma was making them, probably. Started making them back.
Oh, sure they did.
No, they did not.
Maybe not in Iowa.
I never heard of parchment.
Probably not in Iowa, but I bet they did somewhere.
I never had heard of parchment for years. Do we get to taste them?
Oh yeah, of course. You've heard of parchment. So we both have coffee. We have to. I do one dunk. And put. You need the dunk. You need the. Do you always dunk them? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
Pretty much always.
It always stinks if you drop one in there.
Yeah, then you have to get a spoon.
You have like 2 seconds.
No.
If you don't get a spoon to get out, then you just have all the sediment in the bottom.
Well,
which I hate
it
sediment.
kind of dissolves, yeah.
Oh, that's good. There's something about, we should probably, so there's really you can just kind of keep eating and eating them. I love how nostalgic, obviously, they are. And I think what I find surprising, what a lot of people do, the anise, once you bake it, completely different.
Yeah.
It's not just like a strong piece of licorice you're tasting. It takes on a different flavor. So obviously it's not everyone's cup of tea, but try them, you might be surprised. My nieces and nephew, they at first smelled them and said, "No, I don't like it. I don't like it. It tastes like licorice, and it looks like licorice." And then they started eating them. Guess what? They like them now. So you know what? You can start new traditions, bring people on. And I think what's fun is this is just a good one to do together. So it's a great one to end our whole Christmas series on this year, because it's one of my favorites, and yours too.
Yeah.
So as always, I hope you make them. And what helps the most is when you share these videos around. You tag people, you share them to your stories. That helps me so much, but it also just helps so many more people see how easy and fun it can be making memories, doing something they haven't done for years, or just trying something new. As always, the recipe is in the description box or on my website, wiseguy.com, this recipe, so many other recipes, some with my mom, some with not, but well, most with not, but some were with mom. I mean, we're together and she literally was just like, we could throw a rock almost and hit her house. Almost. Make them, enjoy them, have a good Christmas. Thanks for making them with me.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. I'll say it every day.